Well, welcome everyone and thank you for coming. I'm still not used to meetings where I don't have a man with a big sword walking in front of me, but there you go. Anyway, sorry? Oh, well, maybe a mace or something. So today I'm chairing the meeting as interim chair. I don't think we have one apologies for absence, which is from Councillor Eddy.
And we have one member running a little bit late, which is Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. So I'll move on to emergency evacuation procedures and pass on to the Chief.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, colleagues. There is no planned fire alarm test this morning, so if it does go off, it will be for a real event. If you can exit the room using the fire escapes that are clearly labelled, and down the central corridor, central stairs, and make your way out to the rear car park. If that is blocked for any reason, then you can either turn left or right down the corridor, and that will take you to the congregate in the front car park. So thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Moving on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. We have one declared, and that's Amber Foreman has declared an interest in item 8. Do we have any other declarations before we start? No? Brilliant. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, public access. We've received one statement to be presented by members by the FPU in relation to paper 9. That will be read by Amanda Mills, and then the Chief will read a service response. Thanks, Amanda.
Chair, members of the Fire Authority, my name is Amanda Mills. I'm the Brigade Secretary for the Fire Brigades Union in Avon. Members of the Fire Brigades Union wish to express their concerns regarding several items within the report summary and their potential impact on Avon Fire and Rescue Service. Firstly, regarding operational independence. As you may know, the FBU vehemently opposed this concept during the Fire Service Reform White Paper process. The core function of this Fire Authority is to provide crucial scrutiny of management actions, ensuring accountability and preventing mismanagement. Happy to continue?
So,
I think we just have to speak out.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that
Yeah, no worries. Operational independence undermines this vital oversight and risks decisions being made without the proper checks and balances. Section 4.2 outlines supposed savings from using day duty staff to cover the crew shortfalls. While presented as an efficiency measure, this approach has not made consideration for the vital works being carried out by these departments. It places an additional burden on day duty staff who are currently in those day duty roles, conducting the important work to resolve all the requests of the HMI. This is not a sustainable solution and will ultimately impact the service we provide, leading to overwork, reduced productivity, and potentially compromised training and incident response effectiveness. The proposed review of standby movements must be inextricably linked to the Community Risk Management Plan. Leaving a whole-time station with no available appliances, even temporarily, can have severe consequences for response times, particularly in areas with identified risks. We ask today for assurances that this review will not compromise public safety. The reduction of 4 grey book posts, firefighter positions, is unacceptable. FBU members are resolute. We will always fight for properly crewed appliances, maintaining a minimum of 5 firefighters per appliance to ensure the safety of both our members and members of the public. We would also request an update on the authority's lobbying efforts since last year, when 40 firefighter posts were under threat. What action has been taken beyond utilising reserves and raising precepts? These are only options that provide temporary relief. Engagement with the government should not be viewed as a sign of weakness. It's the duty of a forward-thinking fire authority that has highlighted the additional burden associated with national insurance contribution shortfalls and the imposition of an NFCC agenda of broadening the role of a firefighter from an ever-shrinking budget. Furthermore, the report cites increased interest costs, yet all prudential indicators suggest a 1% decrease in the base rate for this year. The service suggestion requires some clarification on the financial justifications presented. Adding to our concerns, we have observed the creation of new non-operational Green Book roles, some of which do not appear to have been advertised through standard procedures. We therefore formally request that the authority mandate full and transparent reporting of all recruitment activities to the relevant committees. Finally, day roles under Grey Book terms offer vital job security and development opportunities for firefighters and managers. They also provide cost-effective ways to retain experienced firefighters who are no longer medically able to perform operational duties. This allows them to utilise their valuable skills and experience in other roles, while simultaneously reducing pension costs. However, over the last few years, many of these day duty Grey Book roles have been removed and replaced with Green Book roles, leaving firefighters nowhere to go except ill health retirement or dismissal under capability. With an ageing workforce and firefighters now expected to work until 60, those who have dedicated their lives to this service should not just be cast aside, they should be offered alternative employment. In a parliamentary debate on the 15th of December 2014, the then Fire Minister gave a guarantee that was welcomed by all sides of the House. She said, if someone fails a fitness test through no fault of their own and they do not qualify for ill health retirement, they will get a redeployed role or an unreduced pension. That will be put on a statutory footing in the national framework, a full unreduced pension, if not an alternative role. We are sad to see that several of our colleagues are currently facing dismissal due to health conditions, and that due to day duty Grey Book roles being reduced, there is nowhere left for them to be redeployed. We urge the Fire Authority to address these concerns seriously and transparently. We believe that these proposed changes will negatively impact the service we provide to the public and the safety of our members. We request a full and open discussion on these issues and a commitment to consultation with the FDU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And now the Chief will respond.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the statement by the FBU and reassure members that we believe in strong foundation of working with the FBU built on positive industrial relations, of which we will always endeavour to maintain. In March 2024, members made the decision to pause any efficiency proposals that were linked to changes in crew models which would not have had a detrimental impact on the number of appliances, fire stations, or our ability to meet our attendance standards for the military response to the public. During that statement, I highlighted that those proposed changes may not meet all of our future funding deficits, but without the time to manage and adopt the changes, there remained a greater risk of harder hitting, greater impact and severe changes needed in a shorter space of time. That short space of time is now upon us. You will see within the financial papers presented to you today that there is a deficit which goes beyond the efficiencies that will also be presented in today's meeting. And the paper invites members to scrutinise the decisions I have made. As your Chief Fire Officer, I'm working alongside the Statutory Finance Officer, as stated in my statement at the Fire Authority meeting in March 2024, to do nothing is not an option. Likewise, to balance a budget based on luck, ifs, buts and maybes, without the prudent assumptions made in our financial planning, would only serve to neglect my responsibilities ahead of paid service. Working with the Statutory Finance Officer, I believe our budget assumptions are prudent. And realistic to minimise and respond to future risks in a volatile and uncertain financial picture. It remains that whilst future years are still uncertain, our deficit for the financial years of 2025 and 2026 and beyond are real and must be addressed in an effective and efficient way. We have to deliver whatever is reasonable in a sustainable way to minimise the impact on service delivery and on firefight safety. The actions I am presenting for scrutiny in Agenda Item 9 are a result of careful considerations that are an alternative to what I presented to you last year. However, as you will see in the budget papers, more still needs to be done. I'll repeat the statement I made in 2024. If the authority wishes to maintain its ambitions in its capital replacement programme, along with significant improvements which are needed across the service, and as identified by the FPU in their public access statement, the revenue budget will not support this ambition without a strong financial plan which seeks to demonstrate best value and continuous improvement. For recruitment, vacancies across the service are coordinated by a people services team, professionals in their field, and are advertised in a manner which promotes equal opportunity and aligned to employment law, and where employment is at risk resulting from fixed-term contracts being terminated. Misinformation about vacancy management is both unhelpful and counterproductive to our cultural improvement journey. Where the FBU make comment about dismissal for health reasons, it would be wrong of me to make comment on individual cases, but again to provide assurances that all decisions are taken with due consideration to medical assessments, their capability to perform the very physical role of a firefighter, and available options for redeployment, early retirement, if eligible, and on extremely rare occasions, termination by mutual agreement. To enable the authority to discharge its functions, there needs to be a workforce that reflects a range of skills and attributes across a wide range of professionalisms such as procurement, finance, corporate assurance, human resources, premises, organisational learning and development, alongside dedicated skilled firefighters to be a professional, high-performing organisation which is not a one-size-fits-all approach. As part of the independent governance review which reported in March 2023, the authority accepted recommendation 3. That was, the current fire authority scheme of delegation should be updated to rebalance member-led strategic decision-making and officer-led operational decision-making, and restated its support to the Chief Officer having operational independence, with the line of delegation giving the Chief Officer responsibility for professional decision-making, with members of the authority providing independent political oversight and scrutiny of performance, and holding officers to account for operational delivery. All papers presented to you today invite that strategic oversight and scrutiny. In the papers for Treasury Management on the agenda today, the Statutory Finance Officer, a trusted professional and advisor in their field, will provide clear rationale about financial assumptions when only a single year settlement is known. Since September, the Chair of the Fire Authority and myself have continued to meet with local members of Parliament. In fact, we had another meeting next week with our North Somerset MP, where the main purpose has been to lobby for a sustainable funding model for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, multi-year settlements and capital funding opportunities. The option to increase the precept by £5 on Band E property presented later today, I know is not an easy decision for members to take. However, without this option, the requirements to make even deeper and cross-cutting efficiencies will be more severe. Change in efficiencies are always very emotive and impactful. However, the options I and the leadership team have chosen are reasonable and proportionate at this stage. The decisions are aligned to mine and strategy finance officer's duty and the responsibility of that of the authority under the Local Government Act to secure best value and continuous improvement. To delay any efficiencies required today and in the coming months will only restrict the ability for me as your current Chief Officer and my successor to lead an effective and efficient service. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And I don't know if we can get anything done about the microphones cutting out, but if we can, that would be great. Chair's business. So for the recording, just to confirm that this Fire Authority meeting is taking place at Severn Park, and we are recording the meeting for the public to view on the Fire Authority YouTube channel. So first off, I will ask members to introduce themselves. I am Councillor Paul Goggin, representing Hartcliffe and Witherwood Ward in Bristol City Council, and I'll go to my left.
Councillor Martin Williams, Cusack Ward, North Somerset Council.
Councillor Ron Curtani from Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor Jane Stansfield, representing Thornbury Ward in South Gloucestershire.
Councillor David Wilcox from Lockleys Ward in the fine city and county of Bristol.
Councillor Ron Hardy, representing Emerson's Green for South Gloucester Council.
Councillor Dan Thomas, representing North Somerset Council, Congswell Gloucester.
Councillor Paul May, representing Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor Tom Enhard, Hawford Ward, Bristol.
Councillor Cam Hayward and Noel Bristol.
Robin Moss, Westfield Ward, Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor Serena Ralston, Clifton Down, Bristol.
Good morning, Robert Payne, Councillor for Western-super-Mare Central, North Somerset Council.
Councillor Chris Murphy, Longwell Green, South Gloucestershire.
Councillor Yasin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill, Bristol City Council.
Councillor Kieran Connolly, Western-super-Mare, Winterstoke, North Somerset Council.
Tim Kent, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, Councillor Matthew Riddle, Severn Vale Ward, South Gloucestershire Council.
Thank you, members, and I'll do the same with the officers now, and I'll go to my left.
Good morning, everyone. Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Good morning, I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
Good morning, Amber Foreman, Director of Corporate Services.
Good morning, Luke Gazzard, Assistant Chief Officer for Service Delivery.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services.
Good morning, Claire Bentley, Head of Finance.
Tanya Nathan, Head of Procurement.
Good morning, Matthew Osborne, Group Manager for Efficiencies and Savings.
Good morning, Paula Lyons, Democratic Assistant Chief Fire Officer, Service Improvement.
Good morning, Richard Welch, Assistant Chief Fire Officer.
Morning, members, colleagues, Simon Shilton, your Chief Forester, Chief Executive.
Thank you, and I believe you've got a recruitment update, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members, I'm pleased to inform you that a member selection panel conducted interviews for the role of Chief Forester, Chief Exec last Wednesday on the 5th of February, and following deliberations, the panel offered the role to Deputy Chief Forester Matt Cook of West Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. Matt has also served at Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service and London Fire Brigade and brings a wealth of fire experience. He has an MBA and is pursuing a PhD in organisational learning and adaptation within public services. Matt's starting date is still to be agreed, but I will ensure that an appropriate handover takes place before I retire on the 31st of March. Due to timing, it was not possible to publish a paper for the Fire Authority meeting today, but I invite members to formally ratify Matt's appointment at your next meeting on the 19th of March. Thank you.
Thank you, and then one more bit of Chair's business is the sad news on Jeff Lovell again. I think, Simon, you were going to say something on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On behalf of Avon Fire and Rescue Service and the Avon Fire Authority, we were sad to hear of the death of Geoffrey Lovell. Jeff began his career as a firefighter at Bedminster Fire Station in 1974 and at the age of 23, and he rose through the ranks during his 3 decades of service. Jeff retired from the service in 2005, but remained as a councillor on Avon Fire Authority for many years. He will be greatly missed by those who had the pleasure of working alongside him, including his many friends from across the service and local government. And before we take a minute's silence, I invite the Chair to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just Jeff was a good friend of mine. He was my local councillor in Knoll West. He encouraged me to become a councillor, and he also showed me that a working class boy could be Lord Mayor. It was fantastic to go along to his funeral. Fantastic is probably the wrong word, but there you go. And thank you to all the members of the service who came along and gave an honour guard. It was a really nice ceremony, and yeah, we'll miss Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Members, can I invite you just to take to your feet, please, and observe a minute's silence in remembrance of Jeff as a former Fire Authority member and firefighter. Thank you, members and colleagues.
And another poignant moment from the funeral, actually, thinking about it now, was Jeff was buried in his Lord Mayor's robes, which because he was so proud of them. But also on his coffin was his fire brigade helmet and his Lord Mayor's hat, side by side. So, I'm just going to advise that Liam Peach, Apprentice Data Systems Support Operator as part of Avon Fire and Rescue Services Corporate Performance Team, was nominated for a non-operational Apprentice of the Year in the National Fire Chiefs Council Apprenticeship Awards. The awards took place on 10th of February during National Apprenticeship Week, and unfortunately Liam didn't come away with an award, but I think we should still offer our congratulations to him on his nomination. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm presuming everyone's already got their phones switched off or on silent. And if you could just, as we've mentioned, use your microphones when you're speaking, and then remember to turn them off when you've finished. So voting today will take place by asking members for a show of hands, and we will firstly ask for any votes against, any abstentions, and then finally votes for. Moving on to agenda item 6 is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Avon Fire Authority held on the 6th of November 2024. And I'd like to ask members to approve these minutes. I propose that they are a true and accurate representation. Do I have a seconder? Okay, Kieran. Thank you. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes in favour? They're passed. Thank you. Agenda item 7. We're doing 3 sets of minutes here. We have minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee held on the 19th of June 2024. The minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee held on the 25th of July 2024. And the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee held on the 25th of July.
Those are the confidential minutes, the last ones.
Yes, we have exempt minutes within that last set of minutes. So if you do have any questions or queries on that, if you could keep that to the end. Although if we do approve all 3 sets of the minutes now, including the exempt sections, we won't have to go into exempt session at the end of the meeting. So are there any comments or queries about these minutes? No, brilliant. Okay, I'll propose we'll do it en bloc, all 3 sets of minutes. I propose that they are an accurate representation, and may I have a seconder? Thank you. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And all votes in favour? Fabulous, that'll save us having to go into the session at the end. So you'll get a bit of your day back. Moving on to agenda item 8 is the appointment of the new Director of Corporate Services, and I'll pass over to Amanda for this.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very short paper from me. As you will recall, we have been running a recruitment round for a new Director of Corporate Services. I can confirm that interviews took place for 3 candidates on the 20th of January 2025. There was a panel of elected members who supported and gave advice to the Chief Fire Officer for that process, and then in accordance with the Constitution, the Chief Fire Officer appointed the interim temporary Director of Corporate Services to the substantive role from the 1st of February, which is an satellite there. So simply you're being asked to note that appointment because the decision was the Chief Fire Officers in accordance with the Constitution. I don't intend to go through much of the other papers. Safe to say that by advertising the role nationally and through Gate and B. Sanderson, they didn't do any headhunting for us. They literally just placed the advert on their website. we managed to attract 15 applications, so it was quite a lot of applications reviewed. We shortlisted 6 and eventually that whittled down to the 3 who attended for interview, so it was a good competitive process. So unless I've got any questions from members, that's the end of that paper.
Simon, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, just to reiterate Amanda's view, it was an extremely competitive field, lots of interest, which is fantastic for the service to have such interest in the role to lead the service going forward or support the leadership team. So just offer my congratulations to Amber as a successful candidate. Thank you.
Yeah, well done, Amber, and congrats. Moving on to the main substantive paper, I think, of the meeting, agenda item 9, service efficiency and effectiveness. And I believe Matt Osborne is going to present on this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, members. Page 51 of your packs, agenda item number 9. I'm going to present the service efficiency and effectiveness paper. Beginning with the summary on page 51. The summary explains the purpose of this report, which is to update the members of Avon Fire Authority on the efficiency and savings requirements for the 2025-26 financial year, and of the Service Leadership Board's decisions to achieve a balanced budget in light of these requirements. It summarises that despite the additional £1.2 million worth of income, which would be received should the option to increase the council tax preset by £5 be adopted, the projected deficit for the coming financial year is due to rise to approximately £1.8 million. The summary also refers to the authority's scheme of delegation, which grants the Chief Fire Officer authority to implement decisions which ensure and deliver operational effectiveness. Page 52 contains a recommendation for which the Fire Authority is asked to scrutinise the report in its entirety and the rationale around reaching these decisions regarding efficiencies that need to be made to assure towards a balanced budget. Just for the minutes, I'd like to note a typo on line 2. Such deficiencies should be efficiencies.
Thank you.
Section 3, background, also on page 52. Paragraphs 3.1 through to 3.8 provide important background information, which starts by referencing the Fire Authority meeting on the 20th of March 2024, during which the authority approved option 2 brackets 3 as outlined within paper 10 of that meeting. This decision resulted in the capital programme remaining unchanged, both in terms of total spend and phasing of that spend, due to the removal of the revenue contribution of the capital programme. Members also determined at that time that suggested efficiencies projects to review whole-time firefighter crewing models could be delayed until 2025-2026. As a result of those decisions, the revised medium-term financial plan, which was also approved in March of 2024, outlined the need for £4.1 million worth of efficiency savings across the 4-year plan, with a projected £1.4 million deficit for the year 2025 to 2026. November 2024, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government published the Local Government Financial Policy Statement for 2025 to 2026, which allows fire and rescue authorities to increase council tax precepts by £5. If approved, this could generate an additional £1.2 million worth of income for the authority. As previously mentioned, financial deficit for 2025-2026 was initially projected to be £1.4 million. However, this has now increased to approximately £1.8 million. And that is assuming the option to increase the tax precept by £5 is accepted. This increase is due to various factors such as a number of financial pressures such as increased national insurance costs, higher capital financing costs, and expenses related to upgrading the mobilising system. The Service Leadership Board has agreed on a programme of efficiency and savings options to address this deficit and maintain a balanced budget. These efficiency and savings options, which are presented in this paper, help to balance the 2025-2026 revenue budget by delivering approximately £500,000 worth of efficiency savings. It's therefore important to note that when the Service Leadership Board and leadership teams made these decisions, the assumed deficit for the coming financial year had, at that time, reduced from 1.4 million to approximately £500,000, which is why the options in this paper total an equivalent amount. However, I've just previously explained that that deficit has now risen, and that the Statutory Finance Officer will inform you later on in this agenda, the agenda for this meeting, of the reasons why. The decisions to address that additional deficit are underway and will be presented to the FAR Authority in due course. And move into section 4, financial implications on page 53. Section 4.2, there's a table in section 4.2 which provides a summary of the 7 agreed savings options and estimated financial savings for each. I'll talk through each one at a time. So number 1 is to utilise day duty grey book staff to enhance crewing levels and reduce overtime costs. Approximate annual savings of £116,000. Option number 2, increase operational efficiencies by expanding use of the crew-based training model. Approximately £53,000. Number 3, review the use of detached duty movements to identify and introduce efficiencies. Approximately £52,000. Option number 4, review the use of appliance standby movements to identify and introduce efficiencies. Approximately £50,000. Option number 5, review and implement a more efficient and effective process for mobilising the drone. Approximately £12,000. Option number 6, increase the use of firewatch functionality to decentralise crewing and reduce corporate staff by up to 2 posts. It's approximately £20,000 for the coming financial year. Option number 7, reduce the whole time establishment by 4 grey book posts whilst maintaining appliance availability. Approximately £212,000 for the coming financial year. And moving on to section 5, key considerations on page 54. Paragraphs 5.1 to 5.3 provide further financial context relating to the precept options, which I believe are due to be presented to you later, and their respective impacts on the medium-term financial plan. I'll leave the detail for the Statutory Finance Officer. Paragraphs 5.4 to 5.5 explain how efficiency and savings options have been categorised as either business change, people change, or structural change options, and the definition for each. Paragraphs 5.6 and 5.7, which cover pages 55 and 56, provide a greater level of explanation for each of the 7 options as previously mentioned in section 4.2. Paragraphs 5.8 to 5.10 reference assurance that comprehensive analysis has been undertaken to scrutinise the service's operational establishment, and that the reduction of 4 whole-time grey book posts can be managed without having detrimental impact on service delivery, community safety, or firefighter safety. For clarity, there will be no reduction in fire appliance availability, special appliance availability, or closure of fire stations. There will also be no change in how appliances are accrued, and this work package will not result in redundancies. Paragraphs 5.15 to 5.19, which are on pages 57 and 58, refer to some work streams already completed or still in progress, which make our service more efficient. The first being the successful introduction of a 12-month trial of a new shift system at Yate Fire Station, which has delivered greater flexibility and work-life balance for firefighters who work at the station, as well as reducing the station establishment from 14 grey book staff down to 12, which has enabled 2 posts to be redistributed to other areas of the organisation where priorities and need dictate. The other is enhancing our use of computer software, which allows on-call firefighters to manage their working rosters more easily and efficiently, which also provides the service with a more resilient and accurate picture of appliance availability. Sections 5.20 to 5.22 begin on page 58. They refer to the national framework, the Fire Rescue National Framework for England, which, when it outlines the financial plans each fire rescue authority are required to produce, includes efficiency plans under that same umbrella. A recent business case has extended the efficiency and savings programme until March 2026, with an updated efficiency plan for this year set to be presented to the Fire Authority in April 2025. Section 6 relates to high-level overview of risks, which I won't list. Section 7 describes the legal and policy implications. And Section 8, background papers. That concludes my presentation of this paper. I'll now hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Matthew. And before we move to questions from members, I wonder if we could go back to section 5.3, which is regarding the final grants letter. And following conversations this morning, I believe we've now received that, and it's not hugely good news, but I'll let Verity talk to you about that.
Yes, thank you. We received, so the papers that are presented to you here today, both the paper that you've just seen and the papers that I will present in terms of finances, were all based, or all written prior to the final grants letter having been received. That letter was received late yesterday. And from an initial review of that letter, it does look like it's going to have a detrimental impact on our revenue budget for next year. So the grants that are included within that letter are in the region of £300,000 lower than the grants that have been assumed in the papers that you see today. So the impact of that will be to increase the deficit that we're seeing, that we're currently seeing. So the 1.8 million that Matt's referenced in his paper is likely to grow as a result of that. We'll continue to have a look at the implications of that letter in more detail, actually, as it was only received yesterday. So it's a very initial interpretation of that information.
Thank you very much, and sorry to throw you in there, Verity. Okay, I'm going to open for questions now from members.
Just a quick one to follow up what you were saying, Verity. Was there any rationale in that letter as to why the figure is lower?
It was only received late on yesterday, so I've had a very quick look at the numbers, but I've not had a chance to read through the letter in any detail yet. But there might well be some further information as to why that's the case.
Thank you. David, and then Ron.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask about paragraph 5.7G and reducing the whole time establishment by 4 grade posts? How will that actually be achieved? Will that be redundancies or not recruiting, or how will it be achieved, please?
So this paper doesn't suggest or recommend any redundancies, and that is not the path which the leadership team will put these changes through. So the reduction of 4 grey book operational staff will be achieved through the natural movement of staff who leave the service. and then 4 of those posts will not be replaced. So no redundancy.
So, thank you for making that clear.
Yes, it's through vacancy management effectively without any redundancies.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. 5.7, option A, which is the utilising off-duty, the day duty greybook staff to enhance crew. How will we go about ensuring the currency, those off-duty staff that haven't currently been working at the front line, how will we ensure their currency for 1 day a month?
So the day duty staff we're referring to are operational members of staff who have moved from an operational role on a fire station to go and perform another uniform function elsewhere on a day duty role. Part of that transition from operations to a day duty role, there is an existing competency framework of 9 days of training over every 2 years for them to maintain their competency. And in fact, during parts of this year, we have used those members of staff to assist with maintaining our crew levels on our fire stations and our appliances. So that framework is already there to maintain competence. In fact, this will provide even greater opportunity for those members of staff to maintain competence levels. Not only will they be completing their 9 days every 2 years, they'll also have an additional day every month to further experience responding to incidents and training and working in that environment. So it could actually have a positive impact on the competence levels of those members of staff, which of course builds resilience in our operational model across the board.
Thank
you, Matthew.
Second part of my
Yeah, please do, Rob.
is option E, which is review and implement a more efficient and effective process for mobilising the drone. Really, the question is, why has that process not already been addressed? If there's a more efficient way of using it, why aren't you doing that? Why are you waiting? While we're waiting and actually saying, well, actually, we'll make a cost saving by this. Surely it would have been better to do it a year ago or 2, whenever the drone arrived. I don't know when it arrived.
The drone has only been in the service for a couple of years, and through our experience of using that resource, we've recently identified some potential efficiencies in that model. So that's why we're working through it at this time. And that is through a reduction of minimising the number of people we call out to respond to the on-call station which it is mobilised from, and just minimising the cost of mobilising those people.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And just going back to your first question, Ron, about the day duty staff. Following my meeting with the FPU, I sought assurances from the chief this morning, and it was about XVRs and being up to date and so forth. So I don't know if you wanted to add something, Simon.
Yeah, as operation officer, we have to go through a command assessment on a regular basis and maintain that competency as Matt described earlier on. And day duty staff also have to go through that operational competence as well. So that will continue to be maintained so that they are not exposed without the relevant in-date qualification and also training and knowledge.
Thank you, Chief.
Robert and then Serena. I think Robert put his hand
Yes.
up.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just rather concerned that the information we received yesterday was so late. So I was wondering if the finance officer could confirm that it's reasonable for us to make these decisions today before that information has been fully analysed.
I mean, I think so. I mean, the information provided on my initial review, obviously, as I've said, looks like it makes our situation worse. The options that are presented or being proposed in this paper, as Matt mentioned, only go to the extent of around £500,000. So we need to do more than this anyway in order to balance the budget next year. So even if a second review of the information that's come from the grant position, I think that we need to do this as a minimum, if not a lot more.
Serena, I think you were next.
Yeah, I'm concerned some of the points that the FBU raised this morning about welfare, to do with day duty grey book staff. So if they're, as I understand it, doing day duty and then they suddenly feel they have to, or they are being asked to switch to crewing level roles and they're not physically able to, as you were saying earlier, you've got the retirement age is now 60. How does that impact their welfare? What choice do they have? I'm sort of worried from a welfare point of view here. Just want to clarify that I've understood it all.
So, the service has quite mature welfare provision. So first of all, if we talk about physical fitness, all operational staff carry out annual physical fitness tests, backed up support there from occupational health providers, and from a mental wellbeing provision, we've got quite an extensive range of options available to people. So in the main, that provides the checks and balance to ensure people who are on an operational fire station are fit and able to carry out those duties. Of course, there are occasions when members of staff, for whatever reason, are unable to perform those duties, and that is when these mechanisms kick in behind the scenes for our occupational health providers, human resources support, and if individuals are unable, for whatever reason, to carry out those duties at such time, that support package kicks in around them, supports them through that transition to get it back to full fitness, whether that be physical, mental, or a mixture of both. But it's not a case of forcing anyone to do anything. It's obviously a culture is one of supporting, positive working environment and supporting people. So it will support people through any transition need that they may need at that time.
Sorry, just to follow up. So what if it's not possible, if they aren't able to do that? Then what if they are a grey book staff member?
So, Simon, do you want to come in with that, please? Yeah, sure. Council, so we have normal substantiated day duty roles for operational staff. Those roles are covered by competent and fit firefighters at different managerial levels, normally from the supervisory manager levels. Most of the posts sit at that particular level. It is those staff that we propose to use in relation to ensuring they maintain their competence and backfilling vacancies on 1 day a month, as Matt described, their operational stations. We have a group of staff that may be unfit in relation to either awaiting medical intervention or recovering from injury, if you like. So it's not those group of staff that we are proposing to use. We have those and we manage those in terms of their return to work through engaging with occupational health and their rehabilitation programme as well.
Thank you. Matthew, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I think those of us that have been in local government for a long time, we believe those in a short time, have come used to having late announcements on funding through all governments. But I can never remember an announcement so late as this, especially as it brings bad news, as it seems as well. So we might want to push back as an authority and make that point to the people that made this announcement. My question, though, is on page 55. It's B. It's right at the bottom of page 55 about the increased operational efficiencies by expanding the use of crew-based training model. Now, I've read that and I just wanted some clarification. Could this scenario happen that somebody's on training at their station and then suddenly they get called to an incident, therefore disrupting their training? That's my concern about this one. Thank you.
So the types of training course that we're referring to here, we have what's called a degradation plan for our fire appliances, and it's based on risk profile and modelling. We can have a certain amount of appliances unavailable for certain periods of time during the day. So these training events are when appliances with the firefighters on them come off the run. Off the run means not available for emergency calls. So they attend the training event uninterrupted, and when complete, the appliance comes back on the run. But the The removal of those fire appliances for operational availability is modelled and is risk profiled and is identified as an acceptable degradation of appliance availability.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, and I think that the alternative we're switching from is that we have external training and that they leave the station to go and do it and therefore wouldn't be available anyway. Thank you. Kieran, I think you were next.
Cheers, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to understand a bit I suppose the context. So if we were projecting a £1.8 million deficit, obviously there's 500,000 savings here. My natural question is why are the savings 1.8 million? So that's the context there. Because what's playing in my mind is are these the lower hanging fruit, as we call it in the business, and we've got some harder decisions to make, or is there some confidence that we might secure additional revenue in year? That's what I'm trying to work out, that balance of what might be coming and actually how challenging the decision is going to be.
So if I understood your question there, Councillor, is I think the first part of the question is why only £500,000? Is that part of your question? Yeah. So this plan started to be implemented or explored pre-Christmas. So we made a number of budget assumptions related to that. Since we indicated and started to move forward with some of these efficiencies and the proposals that we presented here today, we've then had further clarity in terms of what the accuracy of our budgets might look like. And the Statutory Finance Officer will cover that in the next papers in relation to how that's come about, rather than repeat narrative for future papers themselves, and that'll become a little bit clearer. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. At the end of the day, if those efficiencies or if there's funding deficiencies, the funding gap is experienced, we will have to do a lot more than what we're proposing here today. And they will be, as I said in my statement, my response, more hard hitting and more difficult, and they get more and more difficult. We are getting to a point where, as you suggest, low-hanging fruit is becoming few and far between now, without really starting to look at other more severe options, given the size of the deficit that we are facing at this moment in time.
Thank you, Chief. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I suppose the only other bit was, obviously I'm year one, right? Does additional revenue come in sometimes in the year, or actually is this pretty static?
It can do. There is a chance that we will get more in terms of, there's obviously some elements that are fixed now, so once the precept is approved, that's a fixed level. There is an element of grant income that isn't included in the grant letter that we've just talked about, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. So there's a chance, and things like investment income, we've seen in recent years that we've generated more in terms of investment income than we've expected and things like that. So there are likely to be some. I think it's dangerous for us to rely on that. And I think when we look at the medium-term financial plan as a whole, obviously something we'll look at later on the agenda, but we need to be mindful of not just thinking about this current year. So we might be lucky this year and get a little bit more income that might help with our efficiency plans, but actually over the 4-year period, we've got some significant savings to make. So we need to be thinking a little bit more long-term than just 1 year as well.
Thank you. Tim next.
Thanks, Chair. You partly covered what I was going to ask, but I guess what I'd ask, there's 1.2 million, possibly now 1.5 million of additional efficiencies which we've not laid out. How is that going to be brought forward to us as a fire authority? And when that is brought forward, will that be brought forward with options, or will it just be a sort of 1.2 or 1.5 million to save?
So yes, they will be brought forward to the authority, because we've only just, I guess, this deficit has only just been clarified, or we've now a much clearer funding picture for us. That will result in bringing further papers back to the authority for scrutiny and potential decisions, depending on what those options are that we've got available to bridge that financial gap. So I can give assurances that at this moment in time, we need that space to be able to prepare different options and explore what are the best options to propose and bring forward. But the intention is, as part of our efficiencies and our statutory responsibility, both myself and Statutory Finance Officer, to ensure we present to you a balanced budget, we will need to come forward with what those plans will look like as well.
Thank you. And all members know about cutting your cloth, so to speak. And I can remind people of a year ago when we had our last budget meeting, and for those who weren't on the authority then, it was proposed that we cut 36 posts and BA teams be cut down from 5 to 4. So I would say that whilst nobody wants to reduce the workforce, in proportion to what we were facing last year, I think the finance team has done pretty well. I'm going to go to Dan, Paul, and then David.
Thank you, Chair. So my question's a follow-up to Councillor Hardy's first question on section 5.7, option A, and it's how will doing an operational shift once a month be an efficient use of day duty firefight skills? And just a supplementary to that as well, will their workloads, day-to-day workloads, be reduced to allow for that return to operational duty?
Part of the reason for using day duty staff who are operation trained members of staff is to cut down on our overtime expense. So on average, overtime for covering shifts on a whole-time station runs at over £500,000 per year. So it's a way of beginning to reduce that cost, that burden. And for the work that the day duty staff carry out, obviously important work, not just the response function, but our protection, our prevention activities, etc. go on in the background, just as important. Engagement has happened and is ongoing with the leaders of those teams and departments who are adjusting their delivery plans for the coming year to account for that reduction. The impact has been calculated by those leaders, and as I say, following engagement, the leadership team is confident that can be managed through. There is an impact, but we're still sure that we can deliver our statutory functions and our core responsibilities with that change.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say that it's very clear that we, in the next paper, are going to have to agree to the £5 precept. I think we would be daft not to actually do that in technical terms. But what I just wanted to raise a query around 6.2, because we've heard the trade unions make comments around the operational risks with the budget. And the operational risk there in 6.2 is relatively brief. What, as a councillor, what assurances have we got that that will be monitored and that we will be seeing those operational risks monitored through the year?
I'll begin by saying that any reduction of any post, whether that be operational grey book or corporate grey book roles, is a really difficult decision, and one that takes a lot of careful consideration and deliberation. So the reduction of 4 posts has been modelled, and there are various options open to the leadership team in how they employ that change. For example, there are a number of temporary day duty staff who have been moved off of operational duties, and there is with those temporary roles coming to a defined end in the near future, those roles can be put back onto operational duties to balance out and negate the effect of that 4 post reduction. Of course, as with any change, and as with all 7 proposed changes here, they need to be reviewed and the impact reviewed, and certainly from an operational response point of view, we have a robust set of performance related metrics which will be reported to yourselves in one of the subcommittees, and it's through monitoring those metrics, such as our response times, that we'll be able to judge and review and monitor our progress. And as I say, if the outcome is different to what we expect, then the leadership teams will review and adjust and amend as we go forward.
Thank you. David.
I'd like to ask some clarification questions about the letter that's just been received from government and the timeline of which we will need to actually make decisions on that. will we have to have a emergency budget meeting to implement these things? And I wondered if that letter could actually be shared with members so that we get an appreciation of what they're actually talking about, please.
So in terms of the time frames to implement any savings, of course, we've got within the financial year, that's the realisation, financial year 25-26. And so they will become more urgent as the year goes on, for obvious reasons, when we start to realise. So that we've got a small window of opportunity to be able to manage that through in order to balance the books by the end of the financial year. So that will vary in terms of the time frame. Absolutely, yes, we can share that letter. That's not a problem. It's out of the public domain anyway, from that perspective. So I'm sure either Statutory Finance Officer or Emma can share that with members after this meeting. It only came in around about 4 o'clock last night, to be honest with you, which gives all of the notification of grants. It covers things like pension deficit. It covers things like grant funding for protection and a couple of other areas as well. So I think that answers your question in terms of the time frames, Councillor. I've got ready to make those statements.
So my question was, do we have to have another meeting next month to actually decide it?
Yeah. So we've got a end of year in March. We may be able to have further clarity, and our intention is to bring further clarity back at that meeting because we've had some time to look at the review the impact of those grant funding. So my recommendation would, yes, we'd be bringing another paper back to you in March. And in terms of any efficiency plans, that may require an emergency meeting because we'll need to sort of work those through once we know the size of the challenge that we've got ahead of us.
Thank you, Chair. So, just want to ask about how will the reduction of 4 grey book posts affect the operational capacity and response times of the fire station? I know you probably answered this briefly in other questions as well, but I just want to re-clarify how this is going to impact. Thank you.
When considering operational grey book posts, I think it's important to understand that we have those on whole-time fire stations, but 396 positions on whole-time fire stations, and then we have those uniformed staff on day duty roles. So in total we have 476 members of staff. Some on whole-time fire stations, some on day duties. It's not uncommon for there to be movement from one to the other, depending on need in various pieces of work which have to be completed in line with our service plan objectives. So it's within some of the efficiencies and within some of those temporary day duty roles. Some of those temporary roles coming to an end, those roles can be released back into the operational domain, as well as we've already discussed, the provision of day duty staff providing 1 day per month. That provides an additional set of resilience to our operational response model to mitigate the impact of that 4 post reduction.
Thank you. And what other contingency plans are in place if the efficiency measures do not achieve the expected savings?
Excuse me, Councillor, do you mean the savings pertaining to the 4 grey book roles?
And also overall, the efficiency measures for the savings which you proposed. So if you don't meet the expectations, the savings which we want to achieve, so do we have any contingency plans?
What's that? Verity, do you want to come in there from a financial point of view?
I think when we come back to, or when we come forward in the agenda and look at some of the other papers, the budget is set based on a number of assumptions. There are lots of moving parts that could change as the year progresses. So we said there could be more income. There's a big assumption in there around some costs associated with the mobilising project. So we need to be mindful of that, and that the revenue budget for 25-26 is likely to change as we go through the year, and therefore the efficiencies that we need to make to balance the budget are likely to move. However, as we've kind of said before, we need to look over the long term and we need to make savings across the 4 years. So even if our position is slightly better this year, there's still a lot of work to do. We are hoping that we'll get a multi-year funding settlement in the coming year, which will help us with our planning processes. We have reserves that we can utilise for specific projects. We can't rely on those to balance our budget, because that's not a sustainable way to do it, but we do have reserves and a general reserve that can help with cash flow fluctuations if we need to use it. Luckily, we haven't done that in the past. We're lobbying for capital funding as well, which could help fund our capital programme. We'd have to look at options around our capital programme as well, and if there's a need to rationalise that programme, because that puts a lot of pressure on our revenue budget. So there's options that we have to explore as part of that overall efficiency plan to make sure that we can continue to balance the budget over the next 4 years.
Paula, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just really just to offer some further assurances and maybe in the roundabout some of what you covered there. It's just to assure everyone here that there is a lot of data that underpins this analysis. It's got detailed where people are in the organisation, how long their contracts are, etc. We can't bring that here and discuss it in detail because the numbers are so low. It's in 1% in terms of our total establishment. It would be identifiable with people, so we can't discuss the absolute detail. But it's to give those assurances that analysis has been done. In addition to the monitoring and evaluation, as you've heard, the efficiencies and savings team's now been extended until March 2026, and that will enable us to do that continuous monitoring and evaluation and put contingencies in place or change direction if we need to. If we can see something's not working, we are committed to being a learning organisation and making sure we do continue to look at this dynamically. And then just in terms of further contingencies, we already have a number of options and papers which the team are exploring already to look at efficiencies and savings. We've invited everyone in the service to bring options to us, to give us ideas, and we are open to exploring things, and we invite everyone to come with us with things you think might be something you might want to explore. Be creative, think outside the box, and we're open to looking into it. We have a team in place now to do that for us.
Thank you, Paula. Rob?
Thank you, Chair. Now that the microphone's working, I'll ask what we're using. Just a couple of sort of points that I'd like a little bit of clarification on. Has reduction of staff in non-firefighting roles, in other words, in non-operational roles, been considered? And has the authority considered perhaps use of external organisations to cover short-term activities like maybe process development? It's not always prudent to introduce an entire full-time employee for what is a short-term task. And have we benchmarked other organisations who have also gone through budget constraints and efficiency savings to understand the best practice and how that's done elsewhere? You know, maybe in industry, I hesitate to teach anyone to suck eggs, but we went through it with Airbus and many other major organisations have gone through what had to be massive efficiency savings, and it might be a good idea to benchmark some of those. There's some big companies locally that may be going through the same sort of issue, but maybe you have.
So an answer in terms of trying to spread efficiencies across the organisation, yes, absolutely. You will be aware, members of the ambitious improvement programme that we're on. So I'm very mindful of trying to maintain that ambition in terms of our improvement programme. So trying to look at everywhere around the organisation to find those efficiencies is really important, and not just one part of the organisation. If we were to focus on one part of the organisation, that will have a detrimental impact, particularly around our ambitions, which I referenced earlier on in my response. But the paper does give a spread of a reduction in corporate staff and a reduction in operational staff as well. And as I said earlier on, there are still more decisions to be made. This is just the tip of the iceberg if everything is realised what we anticipate to be realised in terms of the efficiencies. Regarding best practice, yes, the efficiency team have been around a lot of different services exploring different patterns. One of those has been implemented, and that was the Yate crewing model, and that was taken from some learnings, if you like, from another organisation, how well it's worked there. And that was in conjunction with the staff at Yate. Firefighters themselves went across and explored and talked to the staff that are operating that model. So that's one example of where we've been able to learn from other organisations. Other services are facing a similar deficit to ourselves, in fact some even more, so it'd be a challenging time. The proposal that I put on the table last March was an operating principle that already exists in the UK FRS at varying different fire and rescue services. So we are constantly monitoring the external environment and other services to see if there are different models out there that we can explore to implement or potentially implement locally.
Thank you. Robin?
Thank you. Just trying to understand the balance between Grey Book and Green Book, and I know that it's not a clear boundary, that there's some kind of fluidity across there. But do we have any numbers for the number of people on grey and green going back 5 to 10 years, so we can see the development of the service over the last decade? And a question for Verity, the letter coming from government was disappointingly late and disappointing full stop. Do we have any indication of other fire authorities as to what their numbers are looking like, and also have they waited quite so long as we have? And I suppose, I mean, Tom and I were at a meeting last weekend where Angie Rayner was there and reassuring yet again that there will be multi-year settlements, which I think everyone will be breathing a sigh of relief when that happens.
So I'll just answer the kind of difference between corporate staff and Grey Book staff. So establishment of the organisation overall is fluctuates around about 900, which is a mixture of whole-time firefighters, fire control staff, on-call firefighters, plenty duty officers, and also corporate staff. And the proportion of corporate staff is in numbers around 200. Around 200 from that perspective, you can certainly work that out in terms of the ratio. In recent years, so when we've had to find efficiency savings in the past, it would be fair to say that the lion's share of those savings were realised through reduction in corporate staff. And as a result of that, a lot of corporate departments to run the organisation were stretched beyond belief and actually were unable to facilitate some of our statutory requirements. And I do believe it's a contributory factor to the continuous improvement that we've experienced as an organisation really since 2017 and beyond, and obviously more recently with our service improvement ambitions, our most recent HMI FRS inspection report, which identified a number of areas where that needed significant investment for improvement. And I believe that a contributory factor to that is that the resourcing levels, matching that resources to risk across the organisation against all of our responsibilities is a really important factor to balance to ensure that we maintain a service that is continually improving and provides the best possible service to our communities. And in terms of the next part of the question, I'll hand over to Verity.
Thank you. Yes, I think hopefully I remember the question correctly in terms of the impact on other services for this delay information in terms of the grant. So I have late last night had a few conversations with other services, and that grant letter has been equally disappointing for them as well. I don't know all of their numbers off the top of my head, but I think some of them slightly more impacted more so than we are, and some are at similar levels. of the 3 services that I've been speaking to, 2 of them have already had their budget setting meeting and set their meeting before that grant letter came out. 1 of them has their meeting next week, so they're just debating whether they've got time to run some new numbers in advance of that meeting. So I think a number of services in a similar position to us in terms of receiving late information and that information not or being detrimental to their budget position.
Okay, thank you.
And Verity, have we had confirmation yet on the national insurance contributions and how much we will be getting back to cover for some of that?
Yes, we have. So we were, in the provisional settlement that was received pre-Christmas, we were told the total amount that had been allocated for local government. But then when the final settlement came through earlier this month, we got specific allocations. So we've been allocated £415,000 towards the increase in national insurance from April this year. I'd assumed in my draft numbers we'd get about 380 on the basis that we thought it was about 50% funded, so it's slightly more than I'd assumed, but it does still mean we are having to fund a net cost of that change of around £400,000.
Thank you. Paul, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Relying on reserves is always a dangerous policy for any organisation to do. Do we have to have a balanced budget every year under the current rules? And under those circumstances, the additional changes that we're talking about, if those are brought in during the year, will that then create a problem for us in the medium term? Is a question about how quickly those additional changes that have been talked about will be brought back before the Fire Authority.
In terms of a balanced budget, yes, we do. We have a legal responsibility to set a balanced budget. It is just for the single year. So we have a legal responsibility to set a balanced budget for 25-26. We look at medium-term financial plan as part of the kind of framework, but that's not actually a legal responsibility for us to do. So we look at a single year in isolation in terms of balancing the budget. In terms of the timings and bringing things back to the Fire Authority, I think we're going to have to see how information progresses really. And bring an update back in March, and then as we've said previously, there might be the need for an additional meeting as well.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, will most definitely be a need for additional meeting once we've worked through and the final figures or the exact figures unknown, particularly with the grant letter yesterday, because there will be some significant areas that we'll need to discuss collectively around proposals to balance that budget this year.
Thank you. And I've got one final question, if you don't mind, Matthew. Section 5.8, it says there that for assurance, a comprehensive analysis has been undertaken by the ENST to holistically scrutinise the service's current establishment in respect to day duty staff and future role requirements. Would it be possible to have sight of that analysis for members?
We have that analysis, not here today. We actually have it in. Simon's happy with us presenting that to you, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. For transparency reasons, we're very happy to provide you with that data. That's no problem at all.
Okay, well that paper was for scrutiny, and I think we've fulfilled that requirement. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, it may already have been looked at, but with regard to the efficiency savings, I was just wondering what work had been done in reducing communications, also some of the communications budget, but also something I've been hearing occasionally we get free lunches and stuff like that. I mean, could stuff like that not be cut? Has that been looked at? And also what we refer to maybe as gizzards, so like the stuff we give away, like pens, that sort of material, has that been looked at? I mean, how much would cutting back on communications, reducing the freebies, reducing the lunches, how much of that save?
I can pick that up now. So, Councillor, one of the other areas that we've started to explore is the non-pay budgets, is what you're referring to there. So, again, setting a key target for our budget holders to make additional savings of 5, 10 and 15% on non-pay budgets as well. So that's all areas of the organisation that we're looking to achieve. But our non-pay budgets will not bridge all of our gaps that we have from a financial perspective, but they will contribute towards. So we're trying to take an holistic approach to all of the savings that we need to make.
Thank you, and I'll take one final question from Serena.
Apologies, I was still a bit new to this. I just wanted to clarify that I think this was answered in another question. So just to clarify that we'll get some stats on the duty grey book roles being removed. So how many being removed and how if they've been replaced with green book roles over the last years. But I think that was something you said you'd provide.
Yes, the establishment changes, there has been some establishment changes, but it's not significant. There has been some changes in respect to prevention teams, an example, where you have a diverse background of staff, both from an operational background, so grey book, and also from a corporate perspective, and that's an area of the organisation that we have changed. But also, we've been able to do that by increasing capacity, not just replacing through grant funding that we received. So that's one area that we have tweaked. Another area is health and safety. So we've been able to change the staffing profile, but it's only one post, but we'd redistribute that post normally to elsewhere in the organisation. So in terms of the reductions in the number of grey book posts, it's more of a redistribution of those posts to elsewhere in the service as opposed to reduction, and then replacing them with corporate staff, which can provide from a financial perspective some greater value for money, some consistency as well from that perspective, as well as being able to provide career pathways for all different category of employee that we hold. And professionalise the workforce as well, which is in the different specialist areas that's needed.
Thank you very much. It would be lovely just to have a little bit more background on it if there was a additional paper information so we can all understand, if that's possible. Yeah.
I can see what data we have, Council, by all means, and share that with you. It will be going back through a number of internal business cases, but any change to any establishment from a grey book establishment would always come through this forum. So that's what I mean around it'll just be redistributed in different areas of the organisation. I'll give you an example of that actually is, so from a HMI perspective, one of the improvement areas was risk information. So we're able to redistribute some operational posts into bolstering that team or increasing numbers in that team. And that's what I mean about just moving staff around accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The recommendation for this paper, and we're going to amend it ever so slightly. Can I get you to?
So I've been listening intently to the discussion, and I wonder whether, so you were invited to scrutinise the report in its entirety and the rationale for each of these decisions. So I wonder if we then say members have done that, but requested that this matter be brought back to the Borough Authority when the impact of the grants letter has been analysed.
Yeah.
I think that probably captures less.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just unclear. This matter or further efficiencies, because that's what needs to come back to the authority is further efficiencies. These are the ones to deal with the immediate pressures that we have right now. So just some clarity so I know what we're bringing back for future meetings, please.
I think the issue we've got with that is the timing, because it's going to take a while to look at those other efficiencies, isn't it? So I think in the immediate term, it's bringing back just the impact of the letter now.
Yeah, my apologies, it's a grant letter you're referring to there. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And that letter will be circulated to members as well, as we've been promised. Sorry, Paul, did you have a point?
Yeah, yes, it's just a governance question, because Simon, I think, is right. Because we've got to make a balanced budget, if we don't have plans for how that's going to be balanced, then I think we should have that included in it. I think he's absolutely right on that.
Okay, well, I'm happy enough to do that. I'm not sure if it will be available for the meeting on March 19th, I think is the next one.
Yeah, I think the timeline might be tight for papers, but so what I can do is perhaps add to the wording and requested that this matter be brought back to the Fire Authority when the impact of the grants letter has been analysed, and then as necessary later for the impact on the balanced budget, or words to that effect. Because it's the impact then on achieving that balanced budget, isn't it?
Okay, well, I hope members are happy with that, because we must press on a little bit. Time is ticking away. So we'll move on to the next paper, which is one for a vote, which is the agenda item 10, 2025-26 budget setting and precept. And Verity is going to present on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is paper 10, starting on page 63 of your packs. The summary on the first page talks through the two options that we have presented here today for you. So option one is fully utilising the referendum limit, the maximum referendum limit that's been set for 25-26, which is to increase our council tax precept by £5. That takes a Band D property up to £90.43. The second option that we're presenting here today is for a 2.99% increase in the council tax precept, which brings the Band D property council tax up to £87.98. The reason we brought that second option for you today is really because it aligns with the level of precept, the referendum limit that was set in the prior year. The second part of the summary just talks about the impact of both of those options, and we've already really mentioned the effect of that today. So option one, with the £5, so the maximum precept increase that we can approve without referendum, we still have a net deficit of 1.8 million. And as we previously discussed, the impact of the grants letter that's just been received is likely to increase that deficit further. In light of the £500,000 of plans that we've just discussed as part of the efficiencies paper, this option would mean that we had a need to identify a further 1.3, and again likely to increase because of the grants letter, further savings during 25-26. The second option, which is a lower increase in council tax precept, obviously increases our net deficit and results in a net deficit of 2.75 million for 25-26. So therefore, results in a more extensive savings requirement for next year. There are a number of recommendations within this paper, which I think we'll come back to at the end, but the one that I just wanted to make very clear at the beginning is recommendation B, which is at the top of page 64. So the recommendation of this paper is to approve option one, so to approve the revenue budget, which increases the Band D council tax level by £5, so the Band D council tax will go up to £90.43 for the next financial year. I will move on to section 5 of the paper and the key considerations. So we have already discussed these, but paragraphs 5.2 and 5.3 talk about the finance settlement information that we've received. So that final local government finance settlement was received earlier this month, and the information that was in that settlement is included within this paper. Paragraph 5.3 talks about the grant letter having not been received, and obviously we've discussed that that was received late on yesterday, and we're expecting that that will have a detrimental impact on our net budget position for next year. Moving on through section 5, there are various tables that summarise some of the information we have received in terms of funding. So table A confirms some of our central government funding related to both the revenue support grant and the business rates top-up grant. We don't tend to receive an increase in business rates top-up grant year on year, but we do have a CPI increase in the revenue support grant, and that's 1.7%, which is based on September CPI for the prior year. Moving on to page 66 of the paper, and at the bottom of page 66, this gives a little bit of a breakdown in terms of the tax base. So this information is received from all 4 of the unitary authorities. So we have overall over 1.4% increase in tax base when we compare 2024-25 to 25-26. And at the top of page 67, we just quantify that. So without any increase in the actual precept level, that increase in tax base does generate us some additional income of around £470,000. Moving on to page 68, and just briefly touching on the summary tables that are presented here. So Table C at the top of page 68 is a summary of the statutory calculations. They are included in more detail in Appendix 1. And one of the recommendations of this paper today is to approve the statutory determinations which are linked to those calculations. The precept table, table D at the bottom of page 68, just really illustrates the impact of the two different options, so the different levels of council tax precept increase for next year based on the tax base for 25-26. So you can see that under option 1 we would generate around 35.6 million of income from council tax, but under option 2, so the lower precept amount of 2.99%, we would generate around 34.6. So you can see there's around £1 million of difference, which is obviously contributing to the £1 million increase in the deficit between the two options. Moving on to page 69, and there's a section there on the precept consultation. So we're required to consult with our communities on the budget setting process. So we have included that as part of a consultation that closed on the 7th of February. Because of publication deadlines, we took a snapshot of the results of that survey as of the 31st of January. And just to highlight that 72% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that the service provides value for money. And 68% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed with the £5 proposed increase in precept levels. Moving on to page 70, and that table at the top, the locally retained business rates table. Again, this is information that's received from the unitary authorities, but I do need to just point out a correction for the minute. So the total in the column for 25-26 currently reads 4057,957, but it should read 5057,957, so just a correction for the minutes. There's a section now that follows on the kind of budget construction and development, and really this talks about the key assumptions that have been made when we developed this budget, and some of those we have already talked about today, so I'll try not to do too much repetition. But in terms of income, the first bullet point under paragraph 5.21 talks about the fact that the minimum funding guarantee has been removed. So we have been given a £5 referendum limit, which is good news, and higher than we previously budgeted for over the previous medium-term financial plan. But what has happened is that a minimum funding guarantee has been removed, which is something that we had previously to the tune of almost £900,000. So whilst we generated an additional 1.2 million of income from the precept increase compared to our last year's medium-term financial plan assumptions, that minimum funding guarantee has been removed. Moving on to the top of page 71, there's a couple of bullet points around income. Something that we've talked about is other grant income, and I suggested that we do receive a number of other smaller grants throughout the year that are not all confirmed at this point in time. So we've assumed a level of income in terms of other grant income, but that could change and is likely to change as the year progresses. But what we've assumed there is a prudent level of other grant income. In terms of expenditure, we've made an assumption of 3% inflation year on year, but we have done a detailed review of non-pay costs. So things like utilities, for example, we've had a look at in more detail to determine whether 3% was really a realistic inflationary increase to apply, and we've worked with head of premises to make sure that we're making the right assumptions there. So that 3% has not necessarily been applied broad brush across every single non-pay category. A very significant assumption within the expenditure is the assumption around the mobilising contract and the upgrade of the current system. So we previously assumed there would be an initial capital investment associated with this upgrade and then ongoing revenue costs kicking in later on. However, the initial feedback from the supplier engagement process has suggested that because we're going for a hosted system, which is likely to have very little in the way of hardware that we're purchasing, there's been a shift in terms of the cost, and we're not expecting to have to spend any of our capital programme on the new mobilising upgrade, but it does mean that it puts additional pressure on our revenue budget. So initial supplier engagement suggested allowing £1 million of revenue per annum. That contract is expected to be awarded in the summertime of 2025, so we may not see a full year's worth of costs. However, because of the upfront implementation costs, the supplier could front load the contract, so we're just trying to plan for the worst case scenario really in this with this assumption, because it's quite a significant increase in terms of mobilising costs compared to the contracts that we currently have with the existing system. And that is one of the key reasons that the deficit has grown. So when Matt presented his efficiency paper earlier, and we talked around identifying £500,000 worth of savings based on the information we had at that point in time, this mobilising system upgrade is one of the significant changes that happened since that assessment. because that's when we received that supplier engagement feedback and realising that actually the upfront costs are likely to be revenue, not capital. So that switch in assumption has had a big impact on the 25-26 budget assumptions. We've assumed pay awards of 2% across both Green and Grey Book. There's a bullet point there around national insurance increases, which we previously talked about, receiving £415,000 of funding, but a net cost of around £400,000 for us. And the final bullet point at the bottom of page 71 is on capital financing costs. We previously assumed that interest on new borrowing would be around 4%. We've changed that assumption to 4.6%, and it's not because interest rates are increasing, they are dropping, but they're dropping much more slowly than we previously expected. So when we set the budget last year, knowing borrowing was over a year away, the interest rate forecast that we had suggested that the borrowing would drop at more steeply than it has. So the current interest rates forecast, which we have presented as part of the Treasury Management paper later on in this agenda, have given an updated forecast which suggests that those rates aren't falling as quickly. So 4.6% is an average of those rates depending on loan maturities and when they're taken out. So it's a slight increase in terms of our cost assumptions. I think at this point it might be useful just to turn to Appendix 2 of this paper, which is on page 79, which is the actual budget in terms of numbers for next year. So the first column is the original 24-25 budget just for comparative purposes. The middle column is option 1, so the option to approve £5 precept increase, and then the final column is option 2, which is to approve the 2.99% precept increase. And really I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the costs within the other cost sections at the bottom of that table. The first one being the capital financing costs. So for 24-25, those capital financing costs are around £700,000. That's based on existing loans we currently hold. For 25-26, we're expecting those capital financing costs to increase because we are going to be taking out borrowing to fund the capital programme. That again will be covered in more detail in the capital paper. But that increased borrowing cost does put pressure on our revenue budget. So just to kind of highlight the link between the revenue and capital budgets there. And the final point just to pick up is that we've included 2 lines there for efficiency savings. That first line identifies the £500,000 that we've just discussed as part of the previous paper. And then the second line, entitled Further Savings Requirements, are the additional savings that are needed to be identified and delivered in order to balance the budget. And as we said, we'll bring back an updated version of the budget position following the receipt of the grants letter. Then the final thing I just wanted to touch on in my paper is the Section 25 report, which starts on page 72, and just really to highlight that this is a legal requirement that I hold as part of my role to make a Section 25 statement, and there are 2 elements of that statement. The first is on the robustness of the 25-26 budget, and there's a paragraph at the end of that section, so it's paragraph 5.30, which just confirms that I'm confident that the principles and assumptions that we've made in terms of setting the budget can be relied on. And then the second section is on the adequacy of the level of reserves. And again, there's a few paragraphs in there talking about the reserves, but the final paragraph, 5.36, just confirms that for 25-26, this is just a single year statement, so just looking at next year's revenue budget. I confirm that I'm happy that we're not placing unnecessarily high or unsustainable reliance on the utilisation of reserves, so that's not a sustainable way to balance the budget. And therefore our reserve balances are sufficiently robust for 25-26. And I'll leave it there, maybe, and open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Verity.
So, would you mind if I open the window? Is that okay? Yeah.
If I could just say before I take questions, the £5 increase. Nobody likes increasing taxes and nobody likes paying taxes, and council tax is a horrible regressive tax anyway. However, for a Band D property, it works out at less than 10 pence a week. And for the services that Avon Fire and Rescue provide, I don't think, in my humble opinion, that's a bad deal. Anyway, I'll move on to questions. Paul, I've got, Robert, David.
Chair, I made my position clear in the previous item, and I think I'd like to propose straight away, regardless of what the letter says, if the £5 limit is our limit that we can do, I think it'd be appropriate for this board to actually make that decision. So I propose that if somebody else is prepared to second that, because I think it is important. If you don't raise it at that level, then the next year you've got to raise it even more. So it's very sensible, I think, that we should go for the £5 option one.
No, I agree.
I'd be prepared to second that proposal.
I'm seeing some nods and everything. I think, I know from the party group leaders meeting that the general consensus was that £5 wasn't outrageous. So we can certainly approve recommendation B. Yeah, I think we can possibly deal with all 5 of the recommendations in one if everyone is happy, basically, that we are increasing the precept by £5, and then the other things that come out of it, making the statutory determinations, agree that precepts be issued to the unitary authorities, note the amount of council tax, and recommendation A was to consider and scrutinise the information contained in this report. But if everybody's happy with that, I'm happy stated.
Sure, I wonder if I could pose some questions about the table and Appendix 2 before we actually move to the vote.
Yes,
Just to
okay.
understand some of the issues that are there, please.
Now it's been moved to second, don't you can vote.
I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. There are some interesting steps in some of these items. For instance, cleaning and refuse in premises costs seems to be going up substantially from this year to from last year. What's the reason for that? Also, car allowances seems to be going up dramatically, and there's another one that seems to be dropping, which is good, which is other supplies and services seems to be dropping by nearly £500,000, and that's good, but I'd like to understand what's not happening as a result of it, please.
So the cleaning contract is quite an easy one. A new contract was signed last year at some point, which is just a higher cost. So it's an increase. It's a fixed contractual cost that we've had to reflect in the budget. I don't know if Tanya wants to bring any more in there.
Yeah, I mean, as you can expect, cleaning is mostly staff costs, so it's all to do with national living wage. We ensure that people get real living wage in our contracts, so any impact has a knock-on effect.
That's good to hear.
Thank you. You happy, David?
The car allowances and the other supplies and services drop.
So the car allowances is the budget will have been based on the current year outturn, so it'll be where we're spending more now. So just trying to set the budget at a realistic level for next year. So we're obviously only spending slightly against that for the current financial year. So we've just brought that into the future. In terms of other supplies and services, quite a few shifting bits in that whole supplies and services section. So you can see equipment and supplies has gone down, as well as other supplies and services, but we've got an increase in fees and services. So some of it is around changing where things are going. There are some things as well we've rationalised within that section of the budget. So having a look again at what we're spending historically against certain things and whether actually we can take some of that budget away because we don't need it. We have done an exercise for the 25-26 budget. Off the top of my head, I don't know the detail within each of those categories, but I know that exercise has taken place, and I know that there have been some miscodings and things being recorded in different places, so we've just tried to align with where the costs are actually coming in.
Thank you.
Chris?
Thank you. Personally, I'm really struggling to get over the increase in communications and ICT. That's rocketing by over 900,000. I think it'd be really useful if ICT and communications were separated. And what is it? The third largest cost is going to be communications and ICT. I'm just struggling to go with that. I mean, what is the explanation for is it 900? £15,000 increase.
Please, Tim.
Fine. So, just to be clear, communications is the broadband and telecoms, that kind of side of things. So that's why it's lumped in together with ICT. So it's the hardware, software, and all the expenses surrounding that. So all the telecoms, mobile phones, etc. So most of that increase is because we are shifting to hosted systems, and by doing that, the revenue gets impacted rather than the capital and revenue. So traditionally, software a long time ago, you would buy the hardware and the software separately, and the hardware was all capitalised. Now, pretty much all software companies are moving to hosted systems, which means they own the hardware, they take the risks, etc. And you are basically in a subscription agreement. So our budgets in that area are going towards revenue rather than plateauing out into capital, and then you buy a one-off license that lasts you so many years. So that's the summary of how, I mean, we'd have to go into every single contract to tell you which ones particularly were impacting, but that's the general gist of it.
It's all about moving towards the cloud. I hate to use that word, but there you go. And we save money on as you say, on the capital, but we pay more on revenue. But that's, Robin Peter's paid for, I suppose, to a certain extent.
Does that include the new app? Does that include the new app?
Which one?
The staffing app, so the shift.
The Firewatch one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry. Several IT contracts.
It's also an area that has had significant underinvestment in recent years. It is linked to what I said earlier on around improvements that are needed and investment. Areas of ICT have had almost no investment actually, and we're creaking it seems. So this is really bringing it up to where it should be, and to a certain extent playing catch up.
I'd like to move towards Paul's proposal if we haven't got any other questions. Okay, the proposal is to accept the recommendations A to E. We have a proposer, we have a seconder. Can I ask for any votes against? Any abstentions? And those in favour? Thank you all for that.
Sorry, I'm very different to ID first thing.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Sorry, no, I was
Councillor-
doing, I think it was listening to it. Oh, well, sorry, I was.
Don't worry, Councillor Murphy, I'll note you down.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, my eyes don't swivel quickly enough, unfortunately. Moving on to agenda item 11, which is the medium-term financial plan. And Verity, who's earning her money today, is also presenting on this one.
Thank you. So this is a forward-looking paper, so looking at the next 4 years worth of financial planning. So as part of the Fire and Rescue National Framework for England, we're required to produce and publish a medium-term financial plan. So this paper brings to you a 4-year medium-term financial plan starting in 25-26, ending in 28-29. There's one recommendation of this report, which is to approve the 4-year medium-term financial plan as detailed in this report and its appendices. And because we have just approved option 1 of the revenue budget for 25-26, so the £5 precept increase, we will be looking at approving appendix 1 of this paper, which is on page 93. Financial implications at the bottom of page 85. Again, we'll focus just on option 1 because that's the option that we'll be looking to approve today. And overall, there's a forecast budget shortfall of £5 million by the end of the 4th year based on this option. That's £5 million of unidentified savings options. We have taken, as was presented in the revenue budget as well, we've got a line for the 500,000 that we've identified a route path towards, and there's an additional £5 million under this option. I will move on to section 5 of the paper, and actually I'll jump to page 87 and table 1 And the top of that table just summarises the main key assumptions that we've made in terms of income across the medium-term financial plan, so in terms of our precept, our tax base increase, the revenue support grant increase, which is increased by CPI each year, and then any other increases in income or any other sources of income that have been assumed to stay static. There will be an impact of the grants letter that we previously talked about. So that grants letter, we're expecting to reduce the income for 25-26 compared to the assumptions we've got now, and that will then have a knock-on effect on the last 3 years of this medium-term financial plan as well. So it's likely that £5 million deficit over the 4 years will increase as well because of that grant letter for 25-26. Moving on to page 88. And table 2 in the middle of the page just summarises the spending assumptions for the medium-term financial plan. So we've got pay inflation of 2% across all 4 years and non-pay cost inflation of 3% across all 4 years. There's one point I wanted to just bring out on paragraph 5.13 as well, which is around the Severn Park facility. So this facility we are in here today. So we have our kind of plan is to utilise this as headquarters in future. We've put aside some money in reserves in previous years. There's around £200,000 in reserves to help with those transitional costs, and the capital programme that we'll look at in the next paper has assigned some capital spend in terms of making sure that this facility is fit for purpose. However, this current revenue budget does not include any revenue provisions that might be needed in relation to this move. They'll likely be in the outer years of the plan, but we haven't been able to quantify those at this time. So there's just a risk highlighted there around some additional costs that we may incur in the latter years of the medium-term financial plan in relation to that. I think what would be useful is to have a look at Appendix 1 on page 93, just to highlight some of the key points, and particularly, again, in section 5 in the capital financing costs, which we'll look at as part of the capital programme as well, but really to just see how the capital programme interacts with the revenue budget. So I mentioned previously that assumption of 4.6% in terms of interest on any new borrowing, and a significant amount of borrowing that we'll be taking out in order to fund the current or the proposed capital programme. But you can see there that capital financing cost is growing from just under £1 million in the first year to over 3.6 million by the end of the 4th year. So it's quite a significant cost that's associated and a significant pressure that is put on the revenue budget when we are looking to invest in the service. And that's a combination of interest rates on borrowing, and also the duty that we have to contribute towards the capital each year through a revenue provision. So it's our minimum revenue provision. Again, it's part of the treasury management practices and policies that we have to adopt, and we have to make that provision. But as our borrowing increases, obviously our cost of capital financing increases, and you can just see how much pressure that puts on our revenue budget if you compare that to the savings that are required to be made in each of the 4 years. There's one final bit I wanted to move back to in the main body of the report, and it's just some financial modelling. So on page 86, I modelled a few scenarios in terms of just flexing some of the assumptions we've made. So, for example, looking at whether a pay award was 3%, what impact that would have on the medium-term financial plan, or if the precept assumption was 1.99%, how that would increase the overall deficit and things like that. The one that I wanted to pick out was the 4th one, which is on the assumption that we would receive a £5 precept increase per annum, and I think this is quite optimistic. But if we did achieve that, it would generate an additional £900,000 of income each year, so reduce our overall deficit by the 4th year by 2.6 million. But I guess the point I want to make is there is still a deficit. So even if we generated £5 a year increase in our precept year on year, based on the current other assumptions within this plan, there would still be a deficit. So we just have to be mindful that we can't rely on the hope that funding might increase in the future, because I think it'd be dangerous to not start thinking about those efficiency plans that we've talked about. And I'm happy to open up for any questions.
Thank you very much, Verity. Questions from councillors? Paul.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm doing my normal trick of talking too much. In terms of this, I'm more than happy to accept it, but I just thought we could actually in fact build in a statement there about whatever the maximum funding that the government allows us, we should be putting that in. Because you made the 2.99 figure, and it may be more, it may be less, but I think as a policy, we could be, in terms of our medium-term financial plan, be looking to always go for the maximum figure that is possible because of the deficits that we've been talking about. And I don't know how you would word that, but I think it would be sensible for us to actually say that if that figure is more, then we should always be looking to put that into our medium-term financial plan.
I think we can have a look at exploring that. I guess the difficulty we've had is that we've only had a single year settlement, so we don't know what those 3 outer years are going to be. So I've done 2.99%. We previously had 1.99%, which felt too low given we've had £5 and 2.99% over the last 3 years. So we've upped it slightly, but at the moment we don't know what that future looks like. When we get a multi-year settlement later on this year, we will look to review this medium-term financial plan and the impact that has on it, because it will obviously feed into our efficiency plans and the plans we need to make over the longer term in terms of savings. I don't know how we might address kind of, as probably as a board, unless we didn't need the increase, we would always recommend the full increase each year, I imagine, especially in, like you say, in the position we're in with deficits, but I'm not sure how we word that into this.
I think every year you have to have a vote on the budget and the precepts. I don't know how you predetermine that, but I think I agree with Verity. I think once a multi-year settlement is available, we could bring that back and consider the options for members.
And the other thing I think we should bear in mind is that we don't know that we're going to be allowed to increase it by £5 each year. The government could change, that. So we're hopefully, but we can't say for definite.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is, in strategic terms, our medium-term financial plan should be based upon the maximum allowable. And under those circumstances, that's not an unreasonable statement to be putting into the medium-term financial plan. But I'm more than happy to approve it. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I do think it's something as a general policy, because of those deficits that we've inherited, that it would be sensible to have that somewhere in the statement in the medium-term financial plan.
Thanks, Paul. We've noted that, so we'll see what we can do. Robert, you had a question.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to raise this here or under the next paper, because both refer to the possible move of HQ to Severn Park to here. So I was wondering if that has actually been decided, because I didn't think it had been, although the paper seems to suggest it has, because personally I would have preferred investigating moving to a more sustainable location.
It hasn't formally been decided. You, as an authority, approved for us to continue on the basis of the potential, as opposed to actual, if that makes sense. The challenge that we have is we will continue at this moment in time, because that was a direction that the authority agreed to, with the possibility of taking on this site post its contract termination. Our challenge is if we are not going to take that position as an authority, then there will be a requirement for capital investment in relation to the training gap and the training facilities that are provided here, and how else do we provide them with our existing premises that we have. Understandably, given the location, it can be a little bit difficult from a public transport perspective as well. But there will be a significant amount of further capital investment that is required by the authority if this is not the preferred option, once we've got all of those details to present to you as they materialise over the next year or so.
It's my understanding, Simon, that is if we don't move the HQ to here, the PFI is ending fairly soon anyway, and we won't be able to use this facility if we haven't got the headquarters here. So it would be nice to use this just as a training facility and then maybe explore, but unfortunately we would face the costs of finding a new training facility as well as a new headquarters, were we to do that.
Yeah, that's correct. The PFI arrangement terminates on the 31st of March 2028. So this facility, unless we reach an alternative agreement, this facility becomes no longer available to us.
Tom.
I just want to say thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I think it's obviously going to be very helpful having the multi-year settlement that we're anticipating. Also, obviously, we've got the spending review, haven't we, in the coming months? And it'd be useful to, once we know more from the spending review, just maybe get a report back here just on any implications there are. service.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there'll be potential implications from the mobilising contract award as well, so considering how that changes our assumptions, so I definitely bring something back.
And again, with our conversations this morning, Verity, I think the intimation, although we can't be sure, is that a multi-year settlement looks as if it is going to happen. Again, obviously, we haven't got a crystal ball, but.
David. One final question, I hope. On page 93, looking at the draft MTP option 1, based on a £5 precept, in section 5, the top line, capital finance in costs, this year it's going to be 979, next year it's going to be 2 million, the year after it's going to be 3.5 million, 3.25 million, and then 3.6 million. What's the reason for that increase level, please?
That's all to do with the funding for the capital programme. So the capital programme is around 37 million, we'll see that in the next paper, but a significant proportion of that, because we will have fully utilised our capital reserve, has to be funded from borrowing, and there's obviously a cost associated. So it's a combination of the interest on that borrowing and the minimum revenue provision that we have to make against it, which is to kind of contribute towards the capital repayment at the end of that loan. In terms of how it builds, we don't have to make a minimum revenue provision in the first year and things like that, so it doesn't quite build as you might expect in line with the spend. And we do have existing loans at the moment, so we do have two £3.5 million loans with the Public Works Loan Board, so they form around £700,000 that first year of capital financing costs anyway, so we're building on top of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim?
Sorry, it's slightly off topic, but on the talk of the future use of this building and sustainability, a new bus route starts going past this building in April, but there are no bus stops within half a mile of this building. So it may be a good idea for the borough to contact Bristol and Wacker about the provision of bus stops, because it seems slightly pointless to have a bus service that cannot actually stop.
I suppose we can just wave it as it goes past. Thank you. Okay, if we've got no further questions, I'll move on to the recommendations, which is we are asked to approve the 4-year medium-term financial plan as detailed in this report and its appendices. Do I have a proposal for that? Thank you very much, Martin. And a seconder? Paul, thank you. Are there any votes against? Are there any abstentions? I'm taking my time on this one, because I missed you last time, Chris. And votes for? Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 12, the council programme and strategy. And just for a change, Rose is going to present on this one.
Thank you. So yeah, paper 12, starting on page 97 of your packs. So it's the capital programme and strategy. So we as a local authority fall under SIPFA, which is a Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting, and one of their recommendations or requirements is that we produce a capital strategy. So this paper brings to you our 3-year capital strategy and then the associated capital programme. There are 2 recommendations of this paper. The first is to approve the capital strategy, and the second is to approve the capital programme, which includes the funding sources that we're anticipating. If I move on to the background section of the paper, on page 98, and paragraph 3.2 specifically talks about what the capital strategy should be and how it should be used. But I think what will be useful is to turn to Appendix 1, which is the capital strategy on page 109, and I'll just pick out a couple of points within it. This strategy is based on the previous strategy that was approved by the authority last year, so there aren't significant changes, but there are a few bits that I just wanted to point out, and particularly on page 114 of your packs, and the funding sources for the capital programme. So it just talks about the ways that we can fund the capital programme, and particularly paragraph or section 8 and paragraph 8.1, which is around revenue funding. So basically confirms that we are allowed to use our revenue budget to fund the capital programme. However, given the conversations we've just been having about our revenue budget, we are not in a position where we have any spare revenue budget to fund our capital programme. So this paragraph really just kind of acknowledges that using our revenue budget to fund the capital programme would be ideal. It would be the cheapest way for us to do it based on internal sources of funding. It's unlikely to happen and it's not something we're forecasting over the next 3 years, but if circumstances did allow, we would utilise our revenue budget in order to fund our capital investment. It would help us to save on borrowing costs and help to make our capital programme a little bit more affordable. The next section is around prudential borrowing. As I've said, we are expecting to take on significant borrowing over the next 3 years in order to fund the capital programme, and we'll look at the details of the numbers shortly. Moving on to page 115 and section 10 on reserves. Again, reserves are one of the cheaper ways for us to fund capital investment, and we do have a capital reserve, which is a result of the sale of the previous headquarters. That reserve is almost fully depleted. We're anticipating to have around 2.5 million by the end of this current financial year, so by the end of March 2025, which means that we'll have around 2.5 million that can contribute towards the capital programme that we're proposing here today. Once that reserve has been fully utilised, we kind of will have exhausted all of our internal sources of funding for the capital programme, which is when we then need to switch to borrowing. One final part of the strategy that I wanted to just pick up was on the affordability of the capital programme, which is on page 117. Section 18, and particularly around the affordability indicator. So it's the last bullet point under paragraph 18.1, and it just confirms that we have a number of things in place to ensure that we determine the affordability of our capital programme, but that final bullet point is an indicator that we set. So it says that our debt charges must not exceed 6% of our net revenue budget each year. It's something that we need to be really mindful of in the coming financial years, because we're looking at taking on a significant amount of borrowing to fund the investment in the service. But it does put pressure on our on our revenue budget, as we've just seen as part of the medium-term financial plan. And the following paragraphs within section 18 really just talk about how we need to make sure that we are mindful of ensuring our capital programme is affordable. We have mentioned earlier today things like capital funding. We don't currently receive any capital funding, but it's something that is being asked. We didn't receive anything as part of the finance settlement this year. If we were lucky enough to receive specific capital funding, that would go towards helping to improve the affordability of our capital programme, because it would mean we can use that funding rather than borrowing. I would say it's unlikely that funding would fund significant amounts of our capital programme, but it would help to reduce and delay some of those borrowing decisions if we were lucky enough to receive it. So those paragraphs talk about other ways of us exploring the affordability of our capital programme, one of which may be looking at rationalising that programme if we haven't got the funding to support the level of investment that we're making. Moving back to the main body of the paper, and section 4, so the financial implications, starting on page 98. So the table at the bottom of page 98 is the total proposed expenditure over the 3-year period, broken down by the main areas of the service. So that's coming in at just over 37 million, so it's a number I quoted earlier on today as well. So 37 million is the planned investment or proposed investment as part of this capital programme over the next 3 years. And then the table at the top of page 99 is the proposed funding. And again, I do need to point out a correction. The total funding available should read 37,249 rather than 38,579 that's in there. But this table just confirms here that we're expecting to have a small amount of capital receipts. So anything we receive from the sale of a service asset, those proceeds are reinvested back into the programme. So we forecast to have a little bit of that. The capital reserves are around 2.5 million, as I mentioned. So those are our two kind of preferred sources of funding, because they're the cheapest way to fund the capital programme in terms of internal borrowing. Before we go to external borrowing, so we're looking at over 34 million of borrowing over the next 3 years. Moving on to section 5, and I just wanted to pick up on paragraph 5.4, which is on page 100, and it's about the proposed changes to the previously approved capital programme, because this kind of puts it into context of what's the key moving parts really. So the overall capital programme has increased by just under 3 million when we compare to the previous capital programme that was approved by the authority in March last year. There's been an increase of over 4 million in the premises capital programme. The premises capital programme is the most significant element of our capital programme. There's over £30 million of investment over the next 3 years. The most significant parts of that investment are the bath refurbishment and the bath rebuild and the western refurbishment, both of which were in the previous capital programme. But there are some additional allowances within the capital programme for premises for things like to help contribute towards our net zero targets, decarbonisation, and some of those capital costs will be associated with the moving of the end of the PFI arrangement and the kind of proposed option of moving to Severn Park for the headquarters. So there's a big increase, well, a chunk of that increase in the increase in the capital programme, a lot of it is in the premises element. There's around £500,000 against the fleet capital programme. That's as a result of rephasing, because we have the major rescue tender is part of the 24-25 capital programme, but it's just the milestones have dictated that that spend will actually occur in 25-26. So that's something that's shifted into this next three-year window. There's an increase of around £500,000 in the IT capital programme. The IT strategy was presented to the Policy and Resources Committee recently for approval, and it talked about the kind of previous underinvestment that we've had within IT, and really there's a hike in the first year of the capital programme to kind of counter and try and rectify that underinvestment, and then the IT investment kind of plateaus, and as we previously mentioned, a lot of IT investment is now moving to be cloud-based and subscription-based, and so the capital kind of pressure is reducing in the future in terms of capital investment from the IT perspective. And the final most significant change in terms of this year's capital programme compared to last is the removal of the control, the new mobilising system investment. So we've talked about that as part of the revenue budgets as well, but that shift of it moving to a hosted system and not requiring a capital investment. So we've taken out £2 million from that control element of the capital programme, as that's no longer needed and the pressure is now being seen within the revenue budget. The next few sections within section 5 of the paper all talk about the detail within the capital programme, and I don't propose to go through those in any detail, but we can turn to Appendix 2 on page 119, and you can just see there the detailed capital programme at the bottom table on that appendix gives you the values and timings of each of the kind of projects within the areas of the capital programme. And then the final thing I just wanted to come back to is in the main body of the report on prudential indicators and affordability. So the prudential indicator, this starts on page 104. The prudential indicators are presented as part of the Treasury Management paper, which is the next paper on this agenda, but they are heavily influenced by the capital programme because it dictates the amount of borrowing and investment of service and then the associated borrowing. So there are some sections within this paper that talk about some of those indicators and the levels at which we set them up, but we'll look at those in more detail when we come to the Treasury Management paper. It's just to highlight really the link between the two. The one that I wanted to mention in a bit more detail is in paragraph 5.31, and it's around that affordability indicator that I mentioned earlier, and that 6% limit we set where we say that debt costs shouldn't exceed 6% of our net revenue budget. And based on the current capital programme and the current expectations of our revenue budget, we are expecting to breach that 6% limit in 27-28, so by the third year, we're looking at having around 7% net financing costs to net revenue, which is something we need to be really mindful. And when I was talking about affordability of the capital programme, this paragraph really just talks about the kind of options that us as an authority need to explore in terms of potentially rationalising the investment, maximising our revenue budget, making mindful decisions and the best value for money decisions in terms of borrowing to make sure that we do maintain a programme that is affordable. So part of SIPRA's requirement to prepare a capital strategy is that our capital investments decisions need to be affordable, sustainable and prudent. So it's really important that we're mindful of that. It is expected to be in the third year, so we do over the next couple of years need to make sure that we're reviewing that capital programme and the investment that we're making continually to ensure that we don't breach that prudential indicator. And I'm happy to open up for any questions.
Thank you very much, Verity. And whilst we've had a lot of doom and gloom today in this meeting, it is nice to see a very ambitious premises capital programme, the bath rebuild, the western refurbishment, decarbonisation, patchway, net zero improvements, as we talked about here, the Severn Park, plus also the major rescue tender and some other vehicles as well. But I'll open for questions. David and John.
Thank you, Chair. I too welcome the investment that's noted in paragraph 5.8. I wonder if we could have some more detail about what's going on there. The Swift Animal and Rescue Vehicles, that's not a hovercraft, is it? Is that something else? And then the new service cars, what are they going to be for, please?
So as part of the fleet replacement programme, certainly with the regards to the Swift Water Rescue and Animal Rescue, that's the one placed at Bath. That one is due for its replacement in the next couple of years. So that procurement process will need to take place. It's getting ageing now, unreliable, and doesn't meet the emissions for the clean air zones either. And that's part of our risk profile for that particular area. So that's that one. In terms of the vehicles, we have a number of fleet vehicles right the way across the organisation. There are a number of things what we use those fleet vehicles for. So they're Class B cars in essence, state cars in the main, most of them. They are either based on station to get firefighters around the different locations on that particular day, or to relieve crews. So like if they're, when they come on duty, if their appliance is already on another incident from that perspective. And we also have provided cars for our flexi duty officers, which is over a period of time of a lease agreement, or the lifetime of that vehicle works out a lot cheaper as well. So we have a number of different elements where we provide vehicles or have the option of access to a vehicle for different areas of the workforce. We also have a pool of cars as well. So we talked about our day duty staff, particularly our prevention officers and also our protection officers, have access to a vehicle so they can go about their daily business, visiting various premises.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And if anybody's in a governing administration and they have any sway over the clean air zone, please try and get a fire vehicle exemption sorted. Any other questions? Dan, sorry. Yes, I did see you before.
No problem, Chair. It's just a very, very quick one on the ICT strategy. Most members wouldn't have seen the strategy presented because it came to last PRC, which I had the pleasure of chairing that day. Paul asked many questions, as this is once. Can say members that day were very impressed with the strategy and with the new head of ICT, Tom Lawson, as well. If you've got any questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions? Paul?
Can I just ask one? In terms of the capital programme moving forward, one is the clean air zones, which we're having discussions about, so I won't dwell on that particularly here. But it is important, obviously, for Bristol and Bath that we've got the right vehicles in terms of pollution and the effect on the communities that we all serve. But the other one was that if we're funding this from revenue, if we've got to make some additional revenue savings, is there some sense in us actually pushing the programme back a bit so that we could make those savings contribute a little bit to the additional savings we've got to make?
Yeah, we're currently going through the review of the capital programme and all of our capital expenditure. Internally, I chair what's called a capital prioritisation and steering group, which actually scrutinises, do we actually need to make that investment now, and is it the right timing for that? And one of the key areas as a result of Treasury management and prudential indicators around borrowing is to review the timings of each of these capital programmes and whether or not, certainly in some areas, can they be stretched a little bit more in terms of maximising the value or life expectancy. There are some, though, that we have stretched to a point where we can't stretch anymore, one being the rebuild of Bath Fire Station as an example.
I wasn't proposing that, Chair.
Okay, I'll move on to the recommendations. We are asked to approve the 2025-2028 capital strategy in Appendix 1 and approve the 2025-2028 capital programme, including associated funding sources in Appendix 2. So may I have a proposer for that? Okay. And a second to David, yeah? Brilliant. Okay, are there any votes against? Are there any abstentions? And all votes in favour? Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 13, we are getting there, and thank you for your endurance. This is the Treasury Management Strategy, including prudential and Treasury Management indicators and MRP policy statement, and I bet you can't guess who's presenting this one. Thank you, Verity.
Thank you. Sorry, it's the last one from me. So yes, as Paul said, it's a lengthy title. It brings you Treasury Management Strategy, the indicator, and the MRP policy statement. There are 3 recommendations of this paper. The first is to approve the Treasury Management Strategy. The second is to approve the minimum revenue provision statement, and the third is to approve the prudential and Treasury Management indicators. By way of background, so section 3 of this paper, starting on page 122, just talks about our current Treasury Management arrangement. So we have a financial services contract in place with Bristol City Council, and under that contract, a number of Treasury Management functions are performed. But paragraph 3.3 just confirms we don't currently engage in, or Bristol City Council aren't Treasury Management advisors, and we don't currently have Treasury Management advisors in place. It's just that paragraph really just talks about the fact that we're exploring that option because of the fact that our borrowing is becoming more imminent and significant, and the cost of that borrowing is significant. We want to make sure that we make the right decisions in terms of timing to get the best value for money. So that's something that's currently being explored. Moving on to section 5 and the key considerations. So paragraph 5.1 talks about the 5 things that the authority should have in place, so should develop and maintain in order to ensure effective Treasury management. So each of those form part of this paper today, with the exception of the middle one. So the third one there is the Treasury management practices. So those practices were brought to the Fire Authority in February last year and were approved by the Fire Authority, and then delegated approval for me to review and make amendments was granted. There aren't any changes to be presented at this meeting, so that's why the Treasury management practices don't form part of this paper today, but any subsequent changes will be brought back to the authority for approval. If we move on to Appendix 1 and the main body of the Treasury Management Strategy, which is on page 127, this strategy is in line with previous strategies, so based on the strategy that was previously approved by the Fire Authority. There's quite a lot of information within the strategy, but just to pick up the kind of overall strategies in terms of both borrowing and investment. So from a borrowing perspective, in the past we've been able to defer borrowing. So we've deferred borrowing by utilising our capital reserves. And as we've mentioned as part of the capital paper, we are getting closer to the point in time where we can no longer internally fund our capital investment, and so we need to look to borrowing. So that borrowing strategy becomes more and more important. And within here, within the Treasury Management Strategy, there's a section on borrowing. And I just wanted to pick up a couple of key points on there, particularly on page 138 in terms of the interest rate. So I mentioned the interest rate assumptions that we made as part of the revenue budget setting, and that 4.6%, which was higher than the interest rate assumption that we made before. And the table at the top of page 139 is where that assumption has come from, really. So they are current, or the most recent interest rate forecasts that we've received via Bristol City Council from their Treasury Management advisors. So the interest rate forecast, paragraph 1.58, just confirms that the interest rates are now forecast to remain higher for longer, which is where that assumption came from in terms of the revenue budget. In terms of borrowing strategy, the borrowing strategy starts on page 140. But the key bits that I wanted to pull out, really, paragraph 1.71, talking about the consideration really in terms of timing and duration for borrowing. So because we're expecting interest rates to fall, we're likely to look at taking out borrowing that has a relatively short maturity to then refinance that at hopefully a lower interest rate. So that will kind of be our overall strategy for borrowing in the short term, but the purpose of kind of exploring the option of having a Treasury Management Advisor is to help us with those decisions. We also have an annual investment strategy as part of this policy, which starts on page 143. Paragraph 1.84 within there just confirms the priorities and the order of those priorities in terms of investment. So we would always prioritise security first before liquidity, and then yield finally. The thing to really note here in terms of investment strategies, we have our bank balances are managed by Bristol City Council. So our day-to-day cash balances, we don't tend to invest any of our cash in any other significant investments. And given the other papers that we presented today, and the fact that we're going to need to borrow to fund the capital programme, we're not expecting to have any significant cash balances to invest. So whilst we've got an investment strategy there, it's unlikely that we will be making any significant investments over the next few years. they were the kind of key points I wanted to pick up out of this strategy. The strategy does define some of the prudential indicators, but I will go through those when we look at the numbers. So if I move on to Appendix 2 and the minimum revenue provision policy statement. Again, this remains broadly unchanged from prior year. There's some specific guidance that's been issued that we have ensured that this policy statement is in line with, and that guidance is referenced in the main body of the report. We are required, we have a duty to make this minimum revenue provision, and it is the provision from our revenue budget to help fund the capital repayment of any loans. So this is something that's increasing as we take up more borrowing. The guidance says that we have to make a prudent provision. It doesn't say exactly how we have to do that, but it does give you some recommended methods, and we choose to adopt what's called the asset life method. So any minimum revenue provision is made based on the life of the asset that the loan was used to fund, not the length of the loan maturity. So that's all defined within this minimum revenue policy statement. And then the final appendix to this paper is Appendix 3, which are the prudential indicators. Based on the fact that we've approved option 1 of the revenue budget, we'll be looking at option 1 of the indicator table, which is the first one on page 161, and it's just because it impacts the net revenue stream. So this table just confirms the prudential indicators that we are proposing to set for the next financial year and the following 2. These indicators are self-imposed limits, so limits that we set and then regulate ourselves against to ensure that all of our treasury management and capital investment activities are prudent, sustainable and affordable. So there's a lot of direct links to the capital programme. So for example, the capital expenditure in that top line is a direct link from the capital programme that's just been approved. The total financing costs take into account the minimum revenue provision on any loans as well as any interest, and it also takes into account some of the financing costs associated with the PFI arrangement because they fall within that category, and also IFRS 16, which I'll touch on shortly. But those numbers are then used to calculate that affordability indicator that I discussed in the capital paper, and that financing cost and net revenue stream. And you can see in 27-28, the 7.1% that's highlighted in red is where we're expecting to reach that 6% limit that the capital strategy sets. So that's when I talked about having to make sure that we're making sensible decisions over the next 2 years to ensure that our programme does remain affordable and within the limits that we're setting for ourselves. In terms of the second half of the indicators, they are all dictated by our capital programme again and our capital financing requirement, which is basically our need to borrow to invest. And we set our capital financing requirement and we link that to our operational boundary. So the underlying need to borrow, capital financing requirement, we set it equal to our operational boundary, which is basically the limit beyond which we don't expect debt to exceed. So we're saying we don't expect debt to exceed any more than the amount that we need to borrow. But what we do is set an authorised limit for debt, which is we apply a margin over and above the operational boundary, and that margin is £1 million, and that authorised limit for external debt is the limit that we are legally not allowed to exceed. So we have to bear in mind we can exceed the operational boundary on a short-term basis, we cannot exceed the authorised limit for external debt. And again, those are all driven by the assumptions that we make in terms of capital investment and the borrowing that is required to fund that. So those indicators are presented for approval here today. I mentioned IFRS 16. And IFRS 16 is a new accounting standard for leases, which brings leases on balance sheet, and it changes the way we account for them slightly. And what it does is we have to take account of IFRS 16 accounting entries when we form our prudential indicators, because they form part of our MRP provision, and they will also have an influence on our capital financing requirement. So what we've done is made an estimate on what our IFRS 16, the impact of IFRS 16 will be on these indicators. We won't know the full impact until we get to the year end, so the end of March 2025, and once we've had those numbers audited, depending on the impact and if there's a material change, we will bring back an updated set of indicators to the authority for approval. CIPRA allows for the indicators to be revised at any point in time and brought back to full authority for approval. So if the estimates that have been made under IFRS 16 need to be revised significantly when we get to year end, we will do that and bring an updated set back to you. The final indicator is on page 163, is the liability benchmark. And really the key thing to note in terms of interpreting this graph, that bottom black line is our existing loan debt. So that's the £7 million of loans we've got now. It drops slightly in 2030 because we repay half of it in March. But what we're comparing it to is our liability benchmark, which is the dotted line, which is to do with our loans requirement, again dictated by our underlying need to borrow, which is dictated by the capital programme. And this graph really just shows that our actual loans are lower than our expected loan requirement. which means that we're going to have to borrow to bridge that gap, which is what we'd expect based on everything we've seen today. If it was the other way around and we had our existing loans higher than our loan requirement, it would raise more questions around the fact that we maybe have borrowed over-borrowed, we've borrowed too much and we should have to spare cash somewhere. But we're not in that position. We're in a position where we know we need to borrow over the next few years to fund our investments. And I think that was all I wanted to mention on that paper. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Verity, for being so comprehensive and understandable, and not having any spare cash. I think we all understand that one. Tim.
So I just had a quick question about the MRP statement, because I asked this as a complete amateur and not really fully understand what I'm reading. So we pay a 4% charge on the capital finance.
That's on.
So that's in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
And that's to repay future, those loans coming back and needing to be repaid. Later on though, it says that we should work out the MRP charge based on the life of the asset of up to 50 years. Well, 4% is sort of a life of around 25 years. And some of the main assets we seem to be spending this on are buildings, new buildings, which I would have thought would have a life of around 50 years rather than 25 years. So I was just trying to understand that and whether or not there was some room for manoeuvre. Because obviously in 2 years' time, the MRP payments are rising to £1.6 million, which has got a substantial amount of the extra cost of borrowing. So whether or not there was any room of movement or whether or not that is all absolutely set.
So the 4% that you mentioned in that first paragraph is to do with any borrowing that was incurred prior to April 2008. So that's kind of an old method of allocating MRP. And then any newer borrowing, we apply the asset life method, which is linked to the life of the asset that the loan was used to fund. So for premises, we do tend to apply 25 years, so a 4% straight line across 25 years. But for other assets, so for example, IT assets might be much shorter, so over a 5-year period, it would be a much higher provision that was required to be made. So it varies. It's not a broad percentage across everything, and it's linked to the investments that the capital programme defines. The MRP policy states that once you've assigned the life of an asset, you shouldn't change it. But it also says you can go up to 50 years. They don't expect you to exceed 50 years, but you can go up to 50 years. So we can have a look at that. It would be that it would align with we've got accounting policies for the life that we assign to certain assets, so it would align to that as well.
I mean, I would definitely sack a builder if he built me a building that didn't last more than 25 years. So I just wonder if that's something we could look at, because obviously it's quite a substantial debt we're putting against some new buildings. I would have thought we would generally expect, I mean, obviously I realise there's refit costs, etc. as you go along, but the main asset I would have thought should be lasting substantially longer. And it's just, if we can reduce down those costs today, that is more firefighters that we can retain.
So, yeah, it's something we'll have a look at, and especially as I said, we're likely to have to bring those indicators back depending on the IFRS 16 impact. It's something we can have a look at that point as well.
Are there any other questions? No? Brilliant. Okay, so we are asked to approve the Treasury Management Strategy for 2025-26 to 2027-2028, which is in Appendix 1. And I'll do them on block. To approve the minimum revenue provision statement 2025-26, Appendix 2. And then finally, recommendation C is to approve the prudential and treasury management indicators in Appendix 3. So can I have a proposer for that, Paul? And a seconder? Dan, thank you. Are there any votes against? Are there any abstentions? All votes in favour? Thank you very much. Last but not least, we have the approval of the new contract procedure rules, and Tanya has been waiting patiently to present. So it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very conscious that lunch is calling me anyway, nobody else. So I will keep it as brief as I can. So this paper is in relation to the contract procedure rules, which are part of the Constitution, which is why it's come to this meeting. You may already be aware from your other authorities that there is a major step change in our Procurement Act and procurement regulations. That comes into force on the 24th of February, so less than 2 weeks. You can hear the anticipation in my voice. So yeah, massive step change in public sector procurement. The idea behind that is to create simpler and more flexible commercial systems, open up public procurement to new entrants such as small businesses and social enterprise, and embed transparency throughout the commercial life cycle so that taxpayers can have a much better idea of what we're spending our money on. So to get ready for this new act, we've had to look at processes, policies, systems, people, and obviously the transition itself. So what impacts which contracts, and what our procurement pipelines look like, etc. So that's just a little bit of context about why we're looking at the contract procedure rules and why we're needing to make the changes that I'm asking to do. At the same time, I thought it was a good idea just to have a refresh of that procedure and make sure that it's still aligned. It was looked at about 18 months ago, so not much to other change other than a couple of tweaks on authority limits and who can sign contracts. So the main bulk of the changes are in relation to the new Procurement Act. So that's the background. That's where you see there are in under key considerations in number 5 a number of reasons and changes within the Act. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of those. I don't think you'll thank me for that. But if you do have any particular questions, feel free to ask me. So there's, as I say, a number of quite substantial changes to the way we do procurement going forward from the 24th. Attached to this paper are Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, so the actual rules. I'm sorry they are messy. I wanted to show you the track changes so you could see what had been changed, but I appreciate that makes them a little bit difficult to read. Obviously, when they're published, etc., it will all look very nice and tidy. And some of the definitions needed to be changed and updated as well. Moving on to risks. Mainly, it's making sure that we cover, as an organisation, any procurement rules and regulations. So we do have a corporate risk around that. The legal implementations sort of speak for themselves. It's a new act. We have no choice. And that's about it. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And it was a pleasure to see you do that presentation at the conference in Oxford that you were invited to do, to tell everyone about the wonderful work of procurement that you do at Avon Fire and Rescue. So I invite any questions we have on the updated contract procedures. No, that's fantastic. So we are asked to approve the changes made to the contract procedure rule. Do we have a proposer? Kieran, and a seconder? Thank you very much, ma'am. Any votes against? Any abstains? And votes for? Thank you. Sorry, my words are stopping coming out in the right order now. It's been one of those meetings. One very last thing is agenda item 15, which are just the dates for the Fire Authority meetings 25, 26. Amanda?
Members, I can be really short. So there is a table on page 220 with future meeting dates. Some of the meeting dates are non-negotiable, so the AGM has to be held after your unitary authority AGMs. The finance meetings have to happen on certain dates, so we have to have one about this time in February to set the budget in time. So I have a little bit of flexibility. We've done our best. It is really difficult to please everyone, as you can imagine, because we're trying to deconflict with 4 unitary authorities. Emma and I are doing a separate piece of work offline to try and move meetings around to more accessible locations for public transport. Thank you for your suggestions. We've got a handful of suggestions, not many, but we are going to work through those, so thank you very much. And we will do our best. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Yeah, can I just ask, are these all afternoon meetings apart from where stated?
Yes, this meeting has to be held in the morning because of informing the unitary authorities in the afternoons. That's why the budget one is always a morning meeting. No, actually, sorry, I'm getting confused. So fire authority is always at 2 o'clock, committee meetings are always at 10:30. So committee meetings are morning meetings and fire authority meetings are afternoon at 2 o'clock. That's how it's been for years. If members have a concern about that or want me to look at other options, then please let me know. I've just followed the way we've done it previously.
Yeah, that's fine. It just wasn't clear.
Thank you, Robert. Any other points, Dan?
Just one for info. Why are the full AFA meetings always on a Wednesday, where the other ones could be round days?
I have no idea.
Except today, sorry.
This predates my appointment. And predates Emma's appointment. I'm sure there might have been a reason for it originally, but again, if you want us to look at other options, please say. It seems to suit most. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think it was originally put on a Wednesday because it seemed to be a day of the week that clashed less with some of your own committee meetings in your local authorities. Now, that might change, but as Amanda said, that's just been a way that we've planned them in for quite some time, but realise that things in local authorities do change and you might have meetings on different dates now. So.
Thank you. Is there any other points on that one? No? Brilliant. So we are asked to approve the schedule of meetings for the municipal year 2025-2026. I have a proposer. Thank you, Dan. And a seconder. Thank you, Martin. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And all votes in favour? Well, thank you all for coming along today. The date of the next meeting is the 19th of March. Strangely enough, on a Wednesday, and that's 2 o'clock. Sorry about that. And that will be held here as well. Thank you all for, as I say, your endurance, and hopefully this has warmed you up for your unitary budget meetings, which are no doubt coming up very soon as well.
Yeah.